Well, I just want to say, Mr. Camp, it's like teenage kids. They're always looking at their cell phone. Look at you. I would have thought you were,
I was
you know.
just posting your picture on Facebook to
I don't
show
know, Greg.
that you are doing what you're supposed to do.
Why?
Facebook Live, let's go.
That kid's smarter than that, tangle with him, because he always has that comeback line. So. All right, Karen. Yeah, that was good. Okay, I gotta give you credit. All right, well, and there we are. So, welcome everybody to the January 27th, 2022 Webster Town Board Workshop. Kind of nice. We got 8 or 9 people in the room tonight, besides the dais, and hopefully for anybody watching at home, new cameras, they're doing great. Love them. So, 4 agenda items tonight. The first one up is a discussion about the Sandbar Park construction management proposals, the town's review process of those proposals, and a proposed selection, and that is going to be presented by Mary Harrington, the town's town engineer.
Hello everyone. Yes, so we are discussing the construction management proposals. To give you a timeline, we went out for proposal on December 23rd, so just before the holidays, and we solicited 7 local companies that provide construction management services. We received the proposals on January 14th. We got 2 proposals, Campus Construction Management and Krista Construction. For the review process, myself, Pat Stevens, the Highway Superintendent, and Matt Chatfield, who partners with the town with WIDA, reviewed the proposals individually, and then we met this Tuesday to review them together. We discussed them, and then we had a rating system in place, and the rating rubric followed exactly what the scoring criteria was in the RFP. So it was the project understanding, the proposed approach, technical and professional competence, similar experience, previous performance record, capacity and availability to perform the work, knowledge of the town, local office and staff, and then just 10% was for the proposed fee, because we like to ensure that the qualifications of the company is the main point for review. Sorry, these maps are so hard to talk through. Campus's proposal we thought was excellent. They clearly understood the scope, both the scope of being the construction manager on the job and also the project scope. They clearly did their research, and they must have reviewed documents on our webpage, because we didn't provide them the specs or drawings or any sort of supplementary information. We had identified challenges in the RFP, and they bulleted those challenges and discussed how they work through them as our construction manager. They are experienced in construction of play areas, parking lots, sidewalks, curbing, landscape, structural concrete, because they do so much school work. They also identified the challenges of all of our funding sources. I think that's going to be a big lift during the construction season. Just making sure that the different state grants are being reported correctly and that everything's itemized for what contract it's associated with. Their staffing was impressive. They were definitely quality people with a lot of experience, and it was nice that they didn't just give the resumes of their staff, they also showed how each staff member would be applied to this particular job. And they've got a good track record of success on tight timelines. They're used to working around school schedules and being successful. They're clearly excited about the project. You can tell the amount of effort that they put into the proposal. And existing clients speak very highly of them. We also thought that Krista put together a good proposal, but that it was more of a template proposal than something specific towards this project. It lacked a clear project understanding statement, and it didn't have a clear project approach for how they would apply their skills to this work. And it didn't have a lot of personalization in terms of Webster. I know they've worked with us in the past successfully, but it didn't really shine through in their proposal. And I think that the two projects that they did a lot of work on with us were heavily focused on buildings, and this is more of a site project. Their project team didn't seem to have the field inspection and record-keeping competence in comparison to campus construction. And they didn't really define what their administrative assistant was going to do, and they had proposed that person for a full-time position on the job, so we were kind of, we couldn't really correlate what that effort was going towards in their proposal. I will note that neither construction manager has a robust history of DOT work, but I have reached out to campus, and they are working to get the required inspector that Monroe County DOT will require. We got that notice from Monroe County DOT about the requirement of a NISA inspector after the proposals came in, so it wasn't included in the RFP. But they have an action plan on how to address that. And then overall, we'll be paying for this professional service on an hourly basis. Campus is more expensive per hour, but they have fewer hours on the project, and their overall project costs came in at less. They were at $290,000, where Krista was at $390,000. And I will say that there's still some negotiation going on with that budget, just because we are trying to problem solve this inspector that needs to be out there for the road work. For the project itself, I went back and looked at the budget, and we had a soft cost budget of $1.35 million for engineering and construction services. So to date, we've spent just over, I think the contracts for Pass Road Bayer, who are doing the design, are around $550,000. So we're in a good place with that budget to award this contract, and then also the construction admin with the consultants during construction, and then the additional phases we should still have budget to work through phase 2 and the building and things like that. So budget looks good based on their cost proposals. So before I open it up to any questions, our next steps are for the town board to approve the award of contract next board meeting on February 3rd. We're looking, we're bidding out the construction project. The documents will go live on February 11th. So we're looking to get the construction manager on board as soon as possible so that they can do any cursory review of the documents before the addendum period is up for the construction bid, so that if there were any things that the town or the consultant didn't catch, we can incorporate any of their suggestions before the bids are opened.
Thank you, Gary. That
Very
was a lot.
detailed.
Yeah.
Certainly done a great job in researching, interviewing, and it was a great report, so thanks for all your work. Pat, you too. Matt, you're out there, thank you.
Mary, the unknown of the inspector, will that add to the cost?
So they're proposing that the inspector that they had lined up to do the work during the road project would be replaced with this NISET level inspector, and then the potential for their project manager to be a little bit more hands-on, so that there's not any issue should their inspector come back on the project when the road is up, so that it'll be kind of a seamless transition, and they'll have a steady team on the project throughout. So we have to see what those rates come in. I don't think, based on what the inspector rate was for their person who had 30 years of experience, I don't think it would be more than that individual, because it was, I would say, on the higher end of an inspector, but you got a lot of quality out of that. So I would think that it would be pretty close to a break even, but I'll definitely report back when I get hard numbers.
And their original quote for the inspector fees were included?
Yes, that was the 290.
Thank you.
So, yeah, they initially had, so they have a full-time inspector on site, for the duration of the project. The Monroe County DOT requirement would be primarily for the work in there right away, so the road. At this time, we're only anticipating that that's one of the potentially 2 construction seasons. So when we brought up this part about the requirement for the inspector, campus's proposal was to essentially, instead of staffing it themselves for 2 seasons, use the inspector portion as the certified NICET inspector for 1 season, and then their own staff for the 2nd season, which allows the cost in their budget for the 1 season inspector to overlap. They just wouldn't necessarily, they would staff it with this inspector type person rather than their original proposal of staff. So just to make that clear that essentially they were switching out a part that they already had included. That's why the dollar increase shouldn't be significant in any way. That was their proposal on how to handle it. We didn't really feed into that very much. We just threw it out there because it wasn't something that was included in either of the numbers. So that just to clarify how they were doing that, how the addition of another inspector could be absorbed. That was the approach that has been discussed so far.
And for those in the room and also watching at home, that was Pat Stevens, our highway superintendent. And Pat, do we have a nameplate for you?
I don't know. I was just told on my way in that if I'm going to continue to be at
Yeah, we're going to have to get
probably
you a
get one.
nameplate, aren't we? Yeah, so
Especially with the
yeah.
asking.
No incognito reporting at these board meetings.
Yes,
so,
sorry about that.
That's not a problem. Any other comments or questions by the board?
I know in past years ago, the county waived the NICET requirement if the inspector had the experience equal to or better than a NICET level inspector. So they may accept the individual once he's submitted. So I don't know if that's changed. I know the county, a lot of people have changed there, so.
I think that's a great point. That's definitely something to look into. Like Mary mentioned, it was just sort of clarified from their point that that's what they require. So we are still working through that process, but we are working with them on that, with their representative, who's in the middle of finalizing these plans and all this stuff, so we can keep everything moving. So that's a great point. Definitely something to discuss. The individual, as we said, that was proposed by the firm that we're recommending, certainly does have a high level, a number of years of experience in all this type of stuff. So that might be a very good possible.
Paul Adams is in the room tonight, our finance director. I know you're not probably queued up on a camera or anything, but construction management, is that a professional service?
I would call it professional service, yes.
So, I think by definition, the town board doesn't have to take the low bid on something like that.
That's correct.
And I think Mary did a wonderful job explaining that in the metrics that we used, you did put some weighting on price, but it was a very minor, I think 10% of your weighting. So where campus did come in $100,000 less at $290,000 versus $390,000 of Krista, that was not really the determining factor in your recommendation when Pat, you and Matt went through these.
That's correct. It was, the scoring, it wouldn't have changed who we thought was the better candidate based on that cost.
And I say that because, I think you did a very good job. As John said, it's about as thorough. The questions I had as you went through your presentation, I was like, oh, she's answering that, she's answering that. A week from today is when the board would actually make a resolution or decision on who to go forward with in construction management. So certainly Mary and Pat and Matt Chatfield, if you're out there, the work you've done to put the board in a position to make an informed decision next Thursday we're very thankful for that. And certainly to the board, if we have any questions for Mary and Pat and Matt in the next 7 days, so that you feel better about what you vote on next week, certainly I think you'd be open to.
Yeah, I do have digital copies of both proposals, and I can share the scoring sheet that we came up with, so if any of you want to see that information, I can
I'd love
send
to.
that out. Okay.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions at this time? Okay. Well, I'll tell you something, Mary. With a minute to spare, we should have you present more often.
This was enough for now. I'll let Josh do the next one.
I bet you Bill just took a shot at me.
No,
No? And then he was like, Mary should give lessons to the supervisor on brevity. Anyway, well, I know you were thinking it, so. Our next agenda item tonight is a presentation to the town board on the town's floodplain ordinance and the DEC Fema issues that we've been navigating for a while. And I'm going to hand that presentation off to our Director of Community Development, Josh Artuso.
I'll try and keep it brief and hopefully we can do it in about 15 minutes. So I'd just like to start out with a brief overview background for people that may not be as familiar with the acronyms or the program. So basically, it's the National Flood Insurance Program, also referred to as NFIP. It was passed by Congress back in 1968. It is a federal program managed by Fema, Federal Emergency Management Administration, and it is the responsibility of local municipalities to actually administer the program. So as a part of the program, FEMA adopted what they call FIRMs, or flood insurance rate maps. So there's several different categories. There's a floodway category, which is an actual stream or channel in the immediately adjacent bank areas. There's the floodplain in the event of a 100-year storm event. And then there's also the 500-year storm event. And then anything outside of those areas is referred to as Zone X. So with Webster, obviously we're surrounded by Lake Ontario to the north and Arundecoy Bay to the west. However, there are numerous other locations throughout town that are designated floodplain areas. You do have Shipbuilders Creek, Mill Creek, 4 Mile Creek. So it's not exclusively along the waterfront areas like some would think. So in order for the town to administer this program, we required floodplain development permits. So it's a special permit type that evaluates a project's impact and sustainability in the event of a flood. So the purpose of the permit is to establish a process for all construction and other development to be undertaken in areas of special flood hazard for the purpose of protecting its citizens from increased flood hazards and ensuring that any new development is constructed in a manner that minimizes its exposure to flooding. So that's an excerpt right out of our local town code. So common activities within a floodplain that require this type of permit, anyone looking to repair or replace a break wall, installation of docks, any construction of a permanent structure, whether it's a home, a garage, a shed, a deck, any additions to existing structures that are within the floodplain, any excavation or dredging, any filling or bringing in of material that would essentially change the pattern of a flood, as well as any bridges or associated abutments and culverts. So a component of the National Flood Insurance Program is the Community Assistance Program. So periodically, there's a community assistance visit that is conducted. It's referred to as a CAV, C-A-V, and it's either by a FEMA staff member or a staff of a state agency on behalf of FEMA. And it basically serves two purposes. providing technical assistance to the community and the staff, and assuring that we are adequately enforcing our floodplain management regulations. So they usually come in, they do a tour of our floodplain areas, they do an inspection of our community permit files and records, and then they have sit-down meetings with local appointed and elected officials. So if any administrative problems or potential violations are identified during this visit, the community gets notified and given an opportunity to help start correcting those procedural issues and remedy any violations if they exist. So I have a brief timeline graphic in the presentation here. The current maps that are in place were adopted by Fema in August of 2008. Shortly thereafter, the town of Webster adopted our own local flood damage prevention ordinance. It's chapter 127 in our town code. And the designated local floodplain administrator was the Commissioner of Public Works position outlined in the original town law. So fast forward about 11 years, and the New York State DEC conducted one of these community assistance visits on September 24th, 2019. As a result of their visit, they notified the town that they had discovered 17 violations that were identified. So the town received a letter in late 2019 outlining the 17 violations. There was a change in administration, new people in different positions, and it wasn't until about July of 2020 that there was a conversation had between town staff and DEC officials about the original violations that they had identified from their visit. So at that point, we had a several hour-long meeting with several staff from the DEC, and the town immediately started to take action to correct the violations. We developed a plan. We implemented some new permitting and inspection procedures, and we continued to have periodic check-in calls with the DEC every 90 days to inform them of our progress and receive some guidance if we were stuck on any particular violation. So throughout the course of 2021, we worked with numerous property owners. Each situation was a little bit different and required a different level of mitigation and or documentation to prove that these structures or these were not, in fact, true violations. So as a result of all those efforts, we have to date resolved 13 of the 17 violations. And as we enter into 2022, we're focusing on resolving the last 4. So on the screen I have just some graphics. We do have a 4-page permit application for the floodplain development permit. We've programmed our permitting software to generate official town floodplain development permits, an example of which is up on the screen. And to date, we've issued approximately over 32 of these since 2020. Some of the procedures we put into place, we've added the floodplain layer to our GIS database. So when someone comes up to the permit counter, we have a layer checked, and that's one of the first things that our staff checks for is whether or not the property is within the floodplain area. So now I just want to give a quick overview of the remaining violations that we have, one of which you're very familiar with. It's the Finn Park Stormwater Management Project. This was a project that was grant funded through the DEC, obtained permitting also from the DEC, and essentially the culvert replacement and the additional stormwater ponds that are planned to be constructed create an issue with upstream, according to the DEC and the modeling that was done, that it does actually cause a 6-inch rise upstream. So upon taking a closer look at the analysis that was done at the time when the project was being designed, it appears as though the actual forebay and the overflow ponds were not integrated into the HECRAS modeling. So from the DEC's eyes, I mean, this project is obviously, the whole intention is to mitigate flooding. So I'm not exactly sure why that element of the project was initially left out of the original analysis, but our plan is to circle back with the engineering company that the town had hired and see if they can remodel, incorporating the entirety of the project, because the whole intent of that project is to mitigate flooding. So it's kind of an ironic situation that it's one of our floodplain violations. I've spoken to a lot of folks at the county who were very involved in the project, as well as our own highway department, and everyone has full confidence that this project is going to make a positive impact. So we're going to work with the engineering company to try and get them to revise the modeling to incorporate all elements of the project, with the hope that it will result in a 0.0 rise upstream, and that would essentially resolve the violation. There's 2 other situations involving single-family homes along Lake Road. One is a potential substantial improvement of a pre-existing structure. So there is a 50% threshold, over time. They don't want people improving properties that are flood prone, so that they're always at risk of being damaged. So they've established what they call a substantial improvement threshold. Essentially, if you spend up to 50% or more of the value of the home in improvements, you automatically have to retrofit the house up to today's building codes and flood codes. So we're talking elevated utilities, furnace and hot water heaters and electric boxes being raised up, installation of flood vents and breakaway walls. So you're talking some pretty major mitigation measures. So we do have one of those cases where we have to evaluate some material that was provided by the homeowner and make a determination of the level of improvements that were made. We have not finalized that particular effort yet, but we intend to in the coming weeks. And then the other one is a rehabilitation of a home that's in the coastal erosion hazard area. That homeowner is substantially remodeling that structure, and they are required to fill in their basement. So they are essentially filling in the whole lowest level of the home with peat gravel and concrete. So essentially bringing everything well above the floodplain level on Lake Ontario. And the third, the final remaining violation deals with a detached garage that was reconstructed along Lake Road in the floodplain, and we are under the impression that with the installation of flood vents to that structure, that would be enough been very cooperative with us in terms of agreeing to that mitigation measure. So the next steps, as I mentioned before, we're going to be reaching out to the engineering firm that did an original analysis for the Finn Park project, and we are going to ask that they rerun their model. There's 2 single-family dwellings, as I mentioned. The building inspector, Nick Mooney, and myself are in the process of performing the substantial improvement calculation to determine what mitigation measures for that home will be required. And then we're looking at the logistics of installing flood vents on the final property of the detached garage that I just spoke of. So, interestingly enough, Fema is in the process of revising the maps for the first time since 2008. We've already been privy to a draft version of them. They do appear to be changing quite a bit in terms of where the 100 and 500-year flood lines are. But again, they're just preliminary drafts at this point. They will be shared with all affected municipalities, and there will be a public comment period for both municipalities and residents to chime in on these proposed map changes. So with that, I would be happy to answer questions that the board may have.
Once again, it's a very thorough explanation and presentation. Thank you.
Anybody?
It'll be interesting to see the new maps when they come out.
Definitely. They have created a new category that takes into consideration wind and wave effects. It's called the BE velocity zone, and it primarily affects the areas along Lake Ontario.
I would just say that the work that Josh has done and Rod Potter did a ton of work on this prior to Nick taking over. It's been quite an effort to get 13 out of 17 out of the result. I know it was a 15-minute presentation, and it is as Reader's Digest as you can get on what we've been doing the last 2 years. So thank you, Josh and Nick. And we'll keep you apprised, town board, because some of these, as Josh said, I don't know if the town board will have to get involved in some of the remediation on this. Just want to make sure you're represented with this now, so. Thanks, Josh. Nick, thanks. All right, next up is a discussion regarding performance contracting with Art Patron and Rick Canali from the sewer department presenting.
Thanks, Supervisor. We're trying to get our streak back going. No nameplates and all, but we're still here. And so just to sort of recap, back in November, I think most of you were involved in initial interviews with EPC, Energy Performance Contractors. At that point, we interviewed 4 companies. We all learned a little bit more about the process and about the companies. At that point, we went out for RFP. We received 2 responses back, one from a company called ESG, the other a company called Navigator. Rick and I and with Denise involved, we created a rubric and reviewed the proposals. And I'm going to let Rick go ahead and review those. I think everyone has a copy of this, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, thank you. And obviously, we also had B&L help us, which is the engineer of record, and their experiences with these types of projects. They've seen these rubrics before, matrices, and gave us the outline for it. We geared it towards what we felt was important for Webster. The weighted scoring, we have a little higher scoring for certain of the categories that we felt really would help our project move along. As you see, we had qualifications of the company at a 10% weighted scoring. Qualifications of the project team, 20%. The execution capabilities plan, 20%.
We need to move that microphone a little closer.
All right, the schedule and implementation, 35%, which is what we felt was the most important part of this project. And project cost control at 15%. As we went through this, the scoring rated from 0 to 2 for inadequate, 3 to 5, which would meet minimum expectations, 6 through 8, good, and 9 to 10 was exceptional. As far as the qualifications of the company, we felt we probably couldn't really go wrong with either company. We did weight ESG a little higher in regards to, and that's because they can perform more contracts and more projects in New York State. One nuance to this is some of the team members on Navigator were with ESG when they were doing these projects, so there's kind of an overlap of experience with projects in New York with both teams. As we got down to the qualifications of the project team, we felt some of the key members that Navigator brought in really geared towards what Webster was looking to do with biosolids and outside waste. And so we kind of rated them a little higher on that one. The project execution and capabilities plan, we went with a slight edge to ESG, again due to the fact with the projects working with B&L, which is the engineer of record. And they both had very reliable management software systems to kind of manage the project. One we felt was most important was project schedule and implementation. And Navigator brought in a more expedited schedule, which would help Webster realize the cost avoidance and revenue generation sooner, which gave a little better economic value to us. And they also brought in a few different ideas that we hadn't thought of in the original PER, but definitely showed some immediate value to the project. And finally, the project cost control. Navigator did have a higher project development cost, but we felt their expedited project schedule and innovative ideas kind of made it an even score, so we brought them in about even with ESG on that. What's that?
Weighted score.
So the weighted score came out what we felt on this. The actual regular score was even, but on the weighted scoring came out Navigator was slightly ahead of ESG. And so that's kind of where we were looking at, and I'll turn it over to Art now to talk about some financial comparisons.
So what the comparison, and I think it's the last page you may have. Like Rick had mentioned, ESG did come in about $189,000 less than Navigator. The Bartlett Judas, the engineer of record, their fee is the same for both. And like Rick had mentioned, this is where it gets key, is the development schedule. Again, there's a development phase and there's a construction phase. And at this point, we're just talking about development phase. That would be is estimated by ESG 12 months, where Navigator is 10 months. And I think Rick calculated that those 2 months you could realize $150,000 to $200,000 savings if we're up and running that much. Construction phase is the same per the PER design, but again, initial concepts from Navigator is creating a different location for solids handling and cells processing that would be built separately, entirely on its own, and that could be up and running. All we have to do is flip a valve and off it goes. Contingency excess, we did look at that. I think, Paul, we talked about that a little bit in our interviews. ESG, any contingency excess is 100% return to the town for ESG. Navigator, their initial proposal was 50-50, town and them. Again, we had follow-up conversations after we reviewed the RFP. That is negotiable. So, the markup is slightly less with Navigator, their overhead and profit. And one thing we did find very important was support after after substantial completion of the project. ESG, there is no support unless you sign a contract. Navigator, there's 3 years included with the project. So that's quite a big value. In talking about support, Rick had touched on it. We like the Navigator team. They bring in other key players. Material Matters is a corporation. They partner with Critical Path Engineering out of Syracuse, and that will help us down the road really drive those biosolids and what we do with them. One other thing that was really stood out for us from Navigator was the Xerox partnership. They have a attorney on staff, Bill Buchanan, and who is experienced in those private and government partnerships, working with Xerox and getting those relationships created, so maybe we can help them drive some business that'll help us as well.
Okay, does that complete the formal presentation part?
It does.
All right. Town board, any comments, questions?
Yeah, the questions that I had, just got done answering, so thank you for that. I think I'm quite curious as to why ESG doesn't have support of a contract, whereas how does 3 years?
I can't answer that question. One of the things that, Navigator, they want the project to succeed, not only, at substantial completion, but long-term. And that has been their talking point since we really,
Yeah, I think that says a lot about the
it does. It's a team approach.
Yeah, and the care of the project that they have, so.
Now, what we can talk a little bit about, and I'll go back to this, the fee, the upfront fee for the development. What we've learned and sort of dug into was it is not uncommon for EPC companies to take a loss on the development in the effort to gain the construction contract. So that very well could be happening with the ESG, with a $31 million contract. They're going to take a hit up front. So.
No?
I'm fine.
Ed?
No other questions?
Okay. One thing I'd like to add is that, there's been a pretty thorough process. When interviews were done with these firms, and they came up hundreds of miles away to present. So the town board members got a chance to sit in on some of those. Performance contracting is a new concept, at least to the town of Webster, for many projects we've done in the past. So I really think we have tried to take a very thorough look at this. And I think similar to the first item tonight, I'll look at you again, Paul Adams, it's deja vu to the first item. This is not, this is a professional service.
It is.
And where it was nice, the first item tonight, where the town board is not somewhat beholden to the low bid, it was nice that when Mary Harrington presented and their recommendation was with the company that had the lowest bid. So that makes it a lot easier for the town board when we go to make our decision next Thursday. This is the exact opposite in some ways. Because what Art and Rick, I think, are suggesting in their recommendation is that Navitas, which on the surface up front is $189,000 more. And I think you've done a good job explaining why and how it will all go through with a $31 million project. I'm going to say the same thing I said at the first one. Town board, since we're looking next week to make start negotiating more terms, specifics with one of these firms, by all means, over the next 7 days, ask away to these gentlemen. Get educated as much as you can on it if you don't feel you've gotten all the education up to this point. It's a pretty big decision.
Supervisor, that's a great point. And, I had mentioned that we've reached out to both companies because we had questions. They're both very open and very quick to respond to any question we have. And, both Rick and I will include Denise in this, we take this charge very seriously. This is it's a large project for the town, but we also realize it's a long-term project for the town. That plant and the function of it will be there far after Rick and I and Denise are gone. So it needs to be done right. And we really, I think we both agree, we did our due diligence looking through these. But please, if there's any questions, anything you want answered, please reach out to Rick or I, and it could be something we didn't think of.
And one other thing, supervisors, you brought up about cost and low bid, high bid, but there's many more facets to this than just that upfront project development cost. There's the,
I was just gonna say that there's a lot of variables in
Yeah.
here.
Yep.
You just can't, look at two numbers. The schedule itself, you're estimating could cost 2 month difference, the savings of $150 right there, right?
yeah,
Right.
to get us up and running sooner.
Yeah.
Exactly, and I think that's something we've talked about, really from day one, is the sooner we can get those solid sand lakes up and running, the sooner we'll realize savings.
And revenue.
And revenue, absolutely.
Yeah, that's all right. Thank you.
I will say one thing though, that, I just want to comment with respect to the interviews, and I'm glad I did participate in those, because I was pretty skeptical about this the direction we're going, but it was very eye-opening for me, and I definitely came on board with the direction.
But I think it was
I appreciate the fact that we were involved in those
Mhm.
interviews.
But your skepticism brought out questions that would not have been brought out before, so it was good.
Yeah,
Yes.
there was some good discussion during the interviews.
And that's why, and I think the supervisor is a big proponent of this, and, Patty and everyone, really, the town board is, we'll sit down and, all right, let's create a plan and a roadmap. And that was one of the key things, we all talked about, so we really should have those interviews, and it worked. So that collaboration really worked.
It's a great process.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks, Rick and Art, and by the way, we got notes here, we're gonna get nameplates.
It's okay.
We're gonna get nameplates for you, all right? No incognito.
That means we're here tomorrow.
Yeah, that's right. Well, you're here a lot. So, the last item tonight is, we're pretty much on time here, is that Ahmed Mustafa is gonna discuss and present the 2021 annual report in emergency medical services for the town. Thank you, Ahmed. How are you doing? Where are we gonna put you so we can hear you?
Oh, you'll hear me after.
Oh,
Yeah. That's never been a problem. All right. Karen, good. All right, good evening Supervisor Flaherty and board members. Councilwoman Nguyen, welcome to our first annual EMS presentation, and usually semi-annual. Mr. Abbott, I promise to keep it short, but 6:30 might be a push. I'll do my best. So, in keeping with the traditional report format that we've done in the past, I'd like to start with just looking at some of the data. The first piece is call volume. So if you look at 2021, NEQ ran 3,660 calls last year. WEMS, 3,954. In aggregate, well over 7,000 calls. What's totally amazing, and I double-checked the math because it didn't seem right at first, a 16% increase in NEQ and a 23% increase in WEMS. That is just unbelievable. That's unbelievable. We're not the only agency seeing this, and we're seeing it at a time when hospitals cannot accommodate the patients that we bring to them. So it's quite amazing, and we don't see the trend slowing down at all. As you look at the table below, I did it graphically, and it's sometimes a picture's worth 1,000 words, sometimes not. Call coverage for us was 93% for NEQ, 94.4% for WEMS, and they both went down a little bit. Why? Because the call volumes jumped at an incredible rate. I mean, it is just a number that 5 ambulances some days would not have been enough, and we just couldn't cover them all. One of the other challenges we face is that even when we cover calls, the first or second out call, we are sometimes sitting at the hospital for hours. And literally, I don't mean that exaggeration, I mean for hours. We've had RGH go code black, meaning no patients, and now we're going to strong. So our transport times become long, or we're literally trapped trying to unload patients. To a point where several times the Irondequoit EMS chief and I literally go to RGH to try and help clear the backflow of patients so we can get our stretchers free. CHS has come up with a brilliant idea in strong. We don't have the option yet, but they literally take a stretcher, load up the ambulance, and leave their stretcher there with the patient and leave. This is a very, very difficult time for all of us. Pandemic, flu, whatever you want to call it, staffing shortages are real. They're real not only at the hospitals, but more importantly, what people don't understand, it's not the hospital's primary issue. It's the nursing homes. There's no place to take patients out of the hospital. And so if you can't take them out, you don't free up a bed. If you don't free up a bed, there's nowhere for the next person to go. We took a person Monday night, a 94-year-old woman from Penfield, congestive heart failure, distended abdomen. She got a bed this morning. She has been sitting in a hallway at a hospital in town for almost 3 days trying to get upstairs. So we are in tough times, and that is what's reflected. One of the other things that's worth mentioning, and I think next year in my report, or next time I report, I'll put a number for this, but though the call volumes are high, they're not all transports. So if we were doing 7,000 transports, we'd be in Fat City, but we're not. So in reality, our transport rate is close to 50%. So the ambulance goes, the patient either doesn't want to go, the patient signs off against medical orders, they didn't need an ambulance. Like we had a call yesterday at a location in the center of town here. A person had been locked out of their house. The police thought, okay, well, it's cold out, so we'll call EMS. We went there, the person sitting in their car, warm and cozy. That's a call, right? That's a call, that's a unit out of service for a period of time. So I'll try and start adding some of that data. One of the other things that we've talked about and always said, we are in a business where minutes matter. So at the top of the next page, it's about time, right? We have done our best to make sure we are meeting or exceeding the region's metrics. And for those of you that have seen this report consistently, for ALS transport vehicle for NEQ, for all of our calls, that's going to Wayne County and Penfield and to Irondequoit, 91.6% of the time we're there within 10 minutes. For Webster only, it's a moderate increase, which shows you that a lot of our calls are close to Webster, and that the fly cars can go a little bit faster than the ambulances. In WEMS, for all calls, 90.7. So for the ambulances, they don't go as fast. Sometimes by rule on the highway, we don't run lights and sirens. So if we're going into Irondequoit or we're going down 390 into Brighton or Henrietta, where we have been going lately, the lights and sirens aren't on. So those are priority one call. We don't run the lights and sirens because the ambulances literally don't go fast enough to get out of the way of traffic. So they stay in the right lane, they go at appropriate speeds, and then go. However, in Webster, 96.4% of the time, we are there within 10 minutes, which is a pretty good metric, I think. For priority 2 calls, 96.6 and 97.5 respectively for NEQ, and for the town of Webster for WEMS, 97.3. And then for the last 2 buckets, I think now for the 3rd or 4th year in a row, I've reported we are 100%. We are actually exceeding the metric, and no numbers fall into the 17 or 25 minute mark. So I would say that overall, call coverage performance is pretty good, hindered a little bit by the fact that call volume went up dramatically and we couldn't unload our patients. And response times continue to trend, I think, at a level that is at or above expectation by regional standards. Operationally, as you all know, we finally took possession and moved into our new base in December 2021. And it's everything we hoped for. So you'll hear me talk about this thing called the NEQ V2. And what is that? That is us changing our paradigm. So for the longest time, we've been the nomads, right? We started NEQ off borrowing space in the fire department, got moved out of there, went to a pole barn that Mr. Bolter. Mr. Bolter gave us on publishers, no heat, no bathrooms. We had to plug our trucks in. Then Mr. Viola, Andy Viola and his family took good care of us for almost a dozen years on Ridge Road. But, you know, the spaces weren't optimal. We couldn't engage with the community. We didn't have a place to sleep, we didn't have a place to eat, we didn't have a place to train. And what has happened with NEQV2 is not only are we now in a home that we can call our own, that we can rest and we can eat and we can train and we can be ready for the calls. All our vehicles are inside. The maintenance dollars have dropped dramatically because diesels like to be warm, right, Art? Right? They like to be warm, and we had them plugged in outside, and you start them up, and they're blowing all kinds of blue smoke. Well, stuff is busting. Now they're kept at a nice warm temperature. They're inside and they're stable. And the other thing is, it allows us to interact more with our crews. So now I get to be there and see them quite often. The other chiefs, which one is here, our Captain Kaylee Hodge, get to interact. Sue gets to interact. We're coaching, we're mentoring, we're training people differently, and we're seeing the morale in the whole building change dramatically. One of the points that raises is that in the last 12 weeks, we've had over 36 applicants. We didn't have that many in all of 20 and 21. So 36 applicants. Now, we're doing our best not to steal from our friends, but all of a sudden we're a place that's not living on broken recliners in a garage to a place that's actually worthwhile. And as we continue to make investments in upgrade equipment and hopefully ambulances over time, we will continue to be what I consider to be a gold standard for EMS in a community. As of January 1st, we've moved to 2 ALS and 1 BLS ambulances covering the whole town. We are closely monitoring the call areas. The second ambulance is now replacing what was in West Webster, so that we now have 3 ambulances running all the time around here. And we're trying to see where the call volumes are and response times to make sure that the west side is covered as well. But fortunately, Jackson Road is pretty central. We can zip down State Road, we can hit Ridge Road, we can hit Clem Road, we can hit 104 if we need to, so we're still very accessible. By staffing our 3 ambulances, our ability to provide mutual aid has increased. And that makes a difference. And the reason is that in the old days, prior to January 1st, one of the ambulances in town, West Webster, was not staffed, so it was not really available for mutual aid. And it was actually closer to Irondequoit than the WEMS ambulances were. And so by now having Webster as a consolidated town, they grab us, we were able to go support Webster and Penfield more often than we have. And in all seriousness, we have gone to Henrietta and we have gone to Brighton for high priority calls because some nights we just get tapped out in the community. And so it's nice to know that Webster has now added value at another layer and level in the region. We've also added 2 more RSI providers. So we had 3, we lost 2, we've come back up to 3, and we'll be sending 2 more to class in the near future. So if you remember, what is RSI? That is where you can give medication to a patient to manage their airway. We basically paralyze them so that their throat becomes relaxed so you can pass a breathing tube. So it's for patients with head injuries where their jaws are clenched, significant trauma, sometimes patients with strokes will clench down, and it's a way to help make sure you're getting life-saving oxygen through a controlled process. There aren't very many of these people in the community, and the NEQ flight cars tend to go all over the place with this. Matt Lloyd is one of the busiest RSI providers in the county in our area, and does an amazing job. Some of the other things we do is we now sit on the Monroe Livingston Regional EMS Council, which we've done for a little while, and soon in April we will chair the Public Information and Education Committee. So as you know, one of the things that we wanted the new base to do was get more engaged with the community, and so we're going to take up that role at a regional level and help increase awareness about EMS and all the things that we do and some of the challenges we face in the community. We've also really recently founded the Monroe County Executive EMS Chiefs Organization. So the police have an Executive Chief's Office, the fire had an Executive Chief's Office, and EMS had no way to really talk to each other. You know, we had the challenges that are going on in the city of Rochester. It's not an EMR problem. I mean, yes, they have challenges like all of us, but if they can't get offloaded at Strong RGH, they get backed up too, then Monroe comes in, and Irondequoit, Brighton, and Gates come in, and then, well, it's just a big sucking black hole. And so a few months ago, we said, you know what, if others aren't going to help us solve a problem, we have to do it collaboratively, right? It's easy to think of AMR and Monroe as commercial agencies, and another group of us as nonprofits, and a few of us as volunteer fire departments. In the end, we're all EMS providers in Monroe County. And so we are chartering an organization called the Monroe County Executive EMS Chiefs Organization, and one of our first acts was to work with the county and ask for some of the ARPA money, right? The fear was 17 of us made 17 different asks. What you get out of that is 0, right? And it shows a lack of unity and a lack of organization. And so we put together one proposal for a few $1 million to ask for training and recruiting money, right? We don't want you to help us fund our operations. We don't want us to help you, buy stuff for us. What we need is we need people. right? Without people, we don't man ambulances. Without staffing ambulances, we don't take calls. And our biggest challenge is we are losing people in this business faster than we're recruiting them. Monroe and AMR have had classes where they're literally paying people to come to the class. They can't fill them. MCC's classes, EMT and paramedic, are not always full. And we're not getting people to graduate through, and when they do, what are they doing? They're getting their EMT or paramedic for a while here. They're either then going to work at the hospitals, which are now paying $45 to $50 an hour to work to staff their EDs, which are killing us, or they're staffing these Fema ambulances going all over the country and getting paid $50 an hour to go somewhere else. So we are not keeping our talent here if and when we get it. So we've got to change that paradigm. One of the other things that we're doing is we've become one of two test sites for the CAD integration and charting software. Why do you care about that? We want to ensure the quality of reporting in the community and in the region, right? Right now, we all have a PCR system, and then we all have to kind of take the data from the computers and manually put it in. Well, that's fraught with errors and omissions and things like that, and it takes a lot of time. So we're trying to find a way to do a seamless integration, and NEQ will be one of the beta sites for that. Earlier, I mentioned some of the mutual aid we give, and I think it's just interesting to look at the table here to show all the places we go. So for WEMS, we obviously Rochester, a bunch into Arundecoit, some into Penfield, then Perrington, Seabreeze, the town of Penfield, and the town of Webster. Those are both the West Webster side. So those things we knew. But look at the fly car. We always talk about it. Is the fly car model still, the best model? It's handy to have sometimes. We go into Rochester, Brighton, Arundecoit, East Rochester, Ontario, Penfield, Perrington, Seabreeze. You can see the list. It's pretty extensive. So it's nice that we have the ability to be flexible in our response so we can help our neighbors out, which, as you can see, we do quite a bit. We continue to do COVID testing, and we're also the recipients of some free test kits for the community, which we hand out on occasion. And we will resume doing home vaccinations for the shut-ins in February. The last bullet on this page is worth a few minutes, which is Nurse Navigator. Some of you may have heard about this on the media. Recently, there was a little bit of discussion, and I just want to explain. Nurse Navigator is not a way to not treat patients. What it is to help relieve system overload. So you get a patient that calls and says, my foot hurts, right? So it's not I'm having a heart attack, it's my foot hurts. And the dispatcher at 911 will say, okay, are you having chest pain, shortness of breath, are you diabetic, difficulty breathing? No. Okay, then I'm going to transfer you to somebody else. And they bump you to this Nurse Navigator. And then they're interrogated again, a whole other series of questions. And if it's deemed that the person doesn't need an ambulance emergently, then they're put in a hold queue for AMR or Monroe, and then every 20 minutes they're called. And if at the next phone call they don't answer, they get an ambulance. Or they say the situation's changed, then an ambulance goes, or else they stay. And what we're finding, we've had 2 of these calls so far in our community, and there are patients that really didn't need an ambulance, right? So eventually they get there, we go pick them up as a priority for later, or someone else goes and gets them, or they find alternate transportation. But the idea is to not even get them to the ED, right? It is not the right place for them. And so we all signed up as a county to try this. We're the only other region besides Knoxville, Tennessee, I think, that's doing it. And its real purpose isn't to help Webster. Very honestly, the 2 people were probably flukes. The real purpose is to alleviate the load in the city, which I think we will do over time. The next page is really a very quick one. In the old days, prior to January 1st, we had EMS boxes and fire boxes. And what that did was, every dispatch we went on was related to a firebox. Well, it was hard for us to get data as to where we were going, what were our response times, what were our call volumes, and as a supervisor is well into data, we are also trying to be a little bit more data oriented. And so we have created new boxes, and if you look at the bottom of the page, we made Route 104 4 boxes, so 2 going east and 2 going west, divided by, I think it's County Line Road. We added 10 boxes on the east side of town. We added 4 boxes in the village and 8 boxes in West Webster. So what that means is at some point, probably next year this time, I'll be able to show you a graphical representation of where our call densities are, what our response times are, if there's a need for a satellite positioning or rotating ambulances. We want to start doing that level of understanding in our community in the near future. I'm going to take a breath. Any questions up to now, or should I march on?
So what was the result of your ask for monies from the county? Have you heard back from them yet?
No, so the ask was due by December 31st. They will evaluate it in Q1, and I think they make decisions later. If I was to bet my dollar, we won't get it back. But we asked, right? We asked as a consolidated group, so it gives us the best shot, I think. But we'll see. So the next page is something that I hope at some point in May we will celebrate as a group and recognize appropriately. We had 18 cardiac arrest days in the town of Webster last year. That's a big deal. 18 people had an opportunity to go home after full cardiac arrest. This isn't our Narcan overdoses and things where we, diabetics that are very low in response. These are cardiac arrest to what we call ROS, return of spontaneous cardiac effect. So I've given you a list, and you can see it's quite a diverse group. And I hope that with the supervisor's help at May, at the start of EMS week, you can recognize these people appropriately. Because that's what we do this business for right here. 18 families had a different outcome because we were around. We also performed 13 RSIs in 2021, which is also pretty impressive. And as we go down, with the help of the payroll protection program in 2021, we finished the year in a pretty strong financial position. We were able to get some long-term savings, a small amount. We finished a little bit in the black more than we did in 2020. However, it was not without a lot of challenge. Our laborers rates went up 13% last year, and I expect they're going to go up again significantly. It is hard to compete with hospitals taking your paramedics. It is hard to compete with Fema taking your paramedics. It is hard to compete with Dunkin' Donuts paying more at the drive-in window than we can afford to pay our crews because of real budget constraints. Equipment and supplies went up dramatically. All of our expenses are going up, and our reimbursement rates are not only unpredictable, but in some cases uncollectible, which makes it very, very hard to save and invest. So I feel proud that we were able to do something a little better than the year prior, but it was not without a lot of challenge. At the top of the next page, in 2022, we would like to ask for some financial help from the community in the form of some of the monies that the town received from the ARPA funds. So at some point in time when it's appropriate, if we could sit down with the supervisor and our budget director and see if there's some opportunity, it would be helpful. Every little bit will help right now. And then as we start going into the next year, it would be nice to start talking about a more permanent solution to see how we can support EMS in the long run. One of the things that we have said we would do when we had the new building, and we are executing on, is developing more relationships with community organizations in the area. Webster Community Chest will be holding their meetings next month at our base. We are collaborating with them to share information, get the word out about them. If we come across patients that are having financial hardship or need assistance, we're going to do some cross-referrals. The Webster Health Education Network, we're working to help identify where some of the narcotic situations are because they don't have all the access to the data. We're helping work with the county that does patient follow-ups. They've invited me to a few patient follow-ups in town. And we're trying to get in the prevention of the narcotics pandemic instead of only response, right? It's very easy to think of an ambulance just as a transport. I want us to think of NEQ and WEMS as a community health support network, not just an ambulance. And so we're trying to broaden our reach. We're working with the Kiwanis Club to talk about some of the camps and scholarships they have to help get some of our children in underfunded communities out to things like that. Working with Webster Fairport Elks, the Chamber of Commerce, the Business Improvement District, and a whole host of other things. We are doing our best to represent the five of you appropriately and be something you're proud of. We don't just want to be an ambulance service. We want you to say Webster EMS and NEQ are part of the network of the community and they're an asset. And that's what we're trying to show here. And before I close and take the last breath, because I know Mr. Abbott's looking at his watch, he's not even wearing one today. Sorry, Mr. Abbott. I can't end these presentations without thank yous, right? I stand up here in front of this podium, I stand up on YouTubes and channels and TV. I'm a talking head, right? The people that do this work are the 72 men and women in this organization. The first is, the paramedics and EMTs. Their job is thankless. We can't pay them enough, we can't give them enough food, we can't give them enough sleep, right? Nobody pulls up and says thank you, though they're getting better at it. But we really need to, at some point, appropriately acknowledge them in this community because they are the people that make all this data happen. The next one is the operations staff. So Deputy Chief Lloyd couldn't be here tonight, but Captain Hodge is here. Those two are the ones that make this business tick, right? Matt makes sure the equipment is running, and the ambulance is running, and the fly cars are running, and Captain Hodge makes sure that we have staff to keep them. That is their primary focus, and they do it without fault and exceptionally well. Our board of directors, who the supervisor and Councilman Cale have met a few times, there are some organizations where the board members are just members that have come up. We have an outside volunteer board that brings a tremendous amount of diversity and knowledge to the organization and give me a lot of support, a lot of strategic support, a lot of direction, a lot of Ahmed, knock it off, go get some sleep, right? And things that are necessary. And it's very, very nice to have them. Then joining us today in the back row is Dr. Katsetos. We have a medical director that actually comes to our base and visits our people. We have a medical director that is trying to build relationships with people, so when he calls them, it's not always a punitive situation, it's a coaching situation. That is something unique in the area. We're very, very lucky to have him and very, very proud to have him. And then the last person that I'll mention before I really stop is Sue. So Sue is back here sitting next to Kaylee, and we have Kaylee and Matt keeping the fleet running and staff, and we have Sue keeping the organization running, right? She is the one that handles all the phone calls that come in. She's the one that handles all our vendors and makes sure that operationally we are in good shape. So it's those people that we have to really thank, not me. I just stand here and present data that they help me generate. And then Patty, you know the last question I like to ask, right? Are we meeting your expectations? We are here at your pleasure, right? Should we do anything different? And how can we better not only serve the town, but the citizens that you have allowed us to serve for these last 30 years? And with that, I'll switch.
Well, I will say this, that, I've had an opportunity along with the supervisor to get educated throughout the myriad of meetings we've had over the past year. And it's a very difficult business to understand, and I thank you and your team for educating me. I still have a lot to learn, with any business, but yours especially is very difficult. And I just, I want to thank you and your team for the professional job that you do. I've had an opportunity to sit in on 2 of your board meetings, and your board members are professional, very knowledgeable, and very verbose conversations go on during those board meetings, and it was very interesting, and nobody was shy about voicing their opinion, the board members, and I really, really enjoyed seeing that and to a limited extent participating. So one of the questions I guess I would have for you is, and I know you touched on it a little bit, is what areas of what can the town of Webster do to help you for the services that you provide our citizens? You showed all the people that your team, you saved their lives. I mean, that's huge, right? You're our ambulance service. So what can we do to help you?
That question itself is step one, right? I mean, I appreciate it. John, thank you for coming to our board meetings. We've never had that opportunity to give not only you the insight, but for our board to see that the town really cares about what we're doing. So we appreciate that. One answer is always money. That's not all we need, right? That's a piece. One of the other things that we need is when you have time, come see us, right? When you see the ambulance on the street, say hi to the folks. If they're out and about, stop. EMS seems to live in this bubble that nobody acknowledges. The firemen all go down to the fire in Parenton Pines the other day, and it was a big debacle, and it was a tragedy. No one remembered the 12 ambulances that were pulled in to help take care of the people that were suddenly homeless and without clothes and blankets and heat. We don't get the recognition and thanks. That is worth more than money. In the week the period between Thanksgiving and Christmas, the most amazing thing happened for the first time in our history. People stopped by our base. They brought food. They took pictures. They brought pizzas. We have never had that. The other day, Sue called and said, "Hey, someone brought a check." I'm like, "Who? I don't know. He's one of the neighbors." Just showed up. That is what we need, right? We need a little bit more of this, and John, I know through your help we'll get it. But we'll also take a little money when we get a chance.
So you're saying next time I come, bring the money?
Bring a check.
Jenny?
No, I just want to say thank you so much for all you do, and saving lives is priceless, and as part of the work, and also I think the community knows all the hard work that you've been, doing, dedication and everything else. We will try to do our best to help you succeed.
Thank you.
So I know that a lot of companies out there are having staffing problems, and you've received quite a number of applicants, and you're struggling with overtime to cover your shifts. And you went over the schedule at one of the board meetings. It's I'm glad I'm not doing your schedule. I'll tell you that right now. What a nightmare that is. Holy smokes. So what are you doing strategically to address the staffing issues?
Well, I think it's a very good question. First of all, we're trying to be competitive in pay, right? But the difficulty is you raise the hourly rate, and then you still rely heavily on overtime. Now you're getting a double win, right? Now you're getting a 1.5 times hit. So it's a tough thing. There are agencies in our county that aren't getting overtime. That rig doesn't get staffed, and they just run light. We've made our best effort not to do that, but that kills us financially, and Captain Hodge is really 20 years old. She just looks like she's 30. I mean, it is an ugly thing to do, right?
Oh, man.
Sorry,
Back
Kaylee.
into the office.
So,
Right home after this.
so, no, the reality is that, Kaylee has put together a plan that we've tried to develop teams, and we're trying to stabilize our schedule so that everybody knows their work routine. Now, it's interesting. I thought that would have been a great thing and everyone loved it, because traditional first responders work on a wheel. And NEQ historically has been kind of what I call a Tetris game. We put it out, who wants to work when, and then Kaylee sits and puts this mishmash together. So we're trying to stabilize that, but it takes time to move that ship, right? The other thing, John, is, the new base helps. I'll tell you, that
Sure.
people are seeing that. And it's little things. So every month, Sue and I sit down and we write birthday cards.
You do what?
People, huh?
I didn't hear what
We
you
write
said.
birthday cards, right? I handwrite birthday cards. When people do good things, we try and recognize them. Like I said a little while ago, thank you in the day room sometimes means more than anything else you can do. So by trying to be a more active and integrated organization, we're trying to get more people in. I mean, you can ask them, they're here. Ask them what's doing a difference if you want. But that's what we're trying to do.
Well, I think you're doing a great job providing an invaluable service to our community. I certainly know that providing medical care and emergency care specifically is very challenging these days, and everyone is feeling the stress of that. I did share with you and Councilman Cahill the piece that was on CBS Morning, Sunday morning show, where Sackett's Harbor was in danger of losing their ambulance. They're not necessarily close to Watertown. There's not a handy place or a quick place that an ambulance will come from. And they are now 100% volunteer, and they are staffed by, I believe it's 10 or 12 high school students who have stepped up, because if you're 17, evidently you can do the EMT training. They are staffing the ambulance in that town, and that's how it survived. So when we look at the professionalism and those who provide care to our town and service, we're really very blessed.
Bill?
Thank you a lot for the presentation, as always, very thorough. We understand your difficulties, and we'll do the best we can to help.
Thanks,
Been any movement? I know that we were talking several months ago when the essential versus non-essential.
So what Councilman Cahill is referring to is EMS still does not exist in the state of New York in legislation, right? We are either a town gets to choose a provider, either their own provider or a contracted provider or something else, or it falls to a fire district. And subsequently we struggle with getting grants because we don't exist. We don't get much from the assistance to firefighter grants, which is billions of dollars every year. EMS gets literally a fraction of a percent. And it's usually fire-based EMS that gets it. And Assemblyperson Lunsford is trying to help put forth legislation with a senator from up near Watertown area. It has been presented several times and it dies on the vine. There's so much opposition from the fire, because they're trying to get reimbursement to get into EMS. So they have a far more organized lobby than we ever will have. And so we're having a very, very hard time. And so that's why every community is having to find a way to get their EMS to support. I sit on another EMS board a little bit to the east of us. 3 nights a week from 1 to 6 in the morning, they shut down their service. They're the third busiest ambulance service near Syracuse because they can't staff and they don't have the money to pay the overtime. So they can only pay what they can pay, and they've chosen to. There's an agency south of us in our county that is staffing 1 ambulance in a fairly busy district because they can't get people and don't want to pay the overtime. So we're getting to points of making very, very hard decisions. And in all seriousness, without the effort of Captain Hodge and her people to help us keep our schedule full, and then us finding a way to balance budget and pay the overtime, we'd all be in the same place. I mean, during the holidays, the city ambulance service was offering triple time. How the heck do you afford that? Triple time. Couldn't fill their ambulances, right? I mean, this is the problem we're facing today. It's not simply a money problem. People are burned out, right? We're sick of wearing these stupid masks. We're tired of being exposed to patients that are ungrateful and unwilling to pay. We have 1 patient today that we were at. It's our 31st time we've been there in 8 months. 31st time, right? And we can't get her help. I've spent my day today, in fact, one of the phone calls here was from her doctor. I have spent my day trying to get her. She's in a hole. She's not old enough for lifespan. She's not old enough for Medicare, Medicaid. She is not sick enough to forcibly get admitted. She's psychologically healthy enough to not get MHA. And she just calls us. And my crew is getting tired. We're getting tired. She's taking up resources. But this is our challenge. So, you know, my crew chastises me. I mean, you know, what are you doing? If we don't find a way to get that person the resources, then we'll just keep doing this forever. Eventually she'll fall down and hurt herself more severely and have a bad outcome. And I'm not going to let that happen. And she's one of 10 that we do that for in this community. So I don't know what the answer is, and at some point I hope that the state government will acknowledge us, but until now they have not.
Yeah, I pretty much knew that was going to be the answer, but I wanted you to have the opportunity to educate people that don't really know that you haven't, that you're classified as not essential.
Yeah.
When you provide life-saving services, I just don't understand. Other than, you know, like you said, lobbying, politics,
Yeah.
which
Take a long time.
it's pretty sad. It's just not right.
Supervisor Flaherty, before you go, can I have 2 more minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. One thing I forgot to bring, Sue reminded me, I was looking at her. We brought some surveys, so I can't share with you the surveys because they got patient information on the bottom. I'd like to just read some of the comments. I'll only read 5. This is from a patient who gave us all strongly agrees in the survey questions. My copay of $250 is a hardship for a sick person needing help. This should be taxpayer funded for the benefit of the public. Very courteous, friendly, got me out of a difficult position with ease, made my ride a breeze. I don't know what ambulance he was in, but okay. I was not the patient. I only answered questions that I could. The patient, my wife, passed away on December 4th call. I'll be donating to your cause. God bless you. I can't say enough about how wonderful the Webster team is. Webster is very, very fortunate. The EMTs were extremely helpful and friendly. My husband had fallen and I could not get him up by myself. They were wonderful to him and me. Brian and his helper were extremely professional, polite, and efficient. I'm certain they helped save my husband's life with the care they administered immediately. My husband has dementia and was totally uncooperative. They handled him the best they could. My thanks to Kevin and the crew. And I could do this 20 more times, but I won't. I'm going to find a way to share this data with you in a sanitized way, because this is the stuff that our crews do every day. I send out every month surveys to all of our prior month's patients. We get probably, what, Sue, 10% back?
Yeah.
10% back, and we get some bad data, right? People are unhappy with some of our service, and always unhappy with our bill. But it's nice to see this, and then what we do with this data, because on the survey I add the crew's name, so we're going to use it for internal recognition, to share the comments internally, and let people know that there are people out there that appreciate what we do. So, all right, sorry, now I promise.
Great, thank you, Chair.
So one last comment is with respect to, you know, your new building, which is just absolutely beautiful, and, you know, I'm sure they deserve it. I'm glad they have it, and it will most definitely help with your recruitment. I think it was a long time coming, and you know, everybody worked very, very hard to get that, especially you. And you know, blood, sweat, and tears went through during the construction process, which I saw firsthand on numerous occasions. I learned a lot about, you know, what was going on over there, but you know, to go through that thing and see it from basically when it started to after it's been furnished with the beds and you know, the education, it's incredible. It's beautiful. So, long time coming. Congratulations, and I'm glad you had a new home.
Thanks, John.
Hey, Ahmed, without the last 2 minutes that you jumped in with the survey results, I just want to congratulate you because your presentation at the beginning was 23 minutes long. And for all those who are here that were here back on November 16th, my monologue was 27 minutes long. So Ahmed is more succinct than me, right, Bill?
It appears so.
It doesn't, though. Well, all jokes aside, November 6th, I mean, this was a recap of 2021, and I really do appreciate that. And we're going to get you out of here tonight. I just want you to know that, and this is important for us to know about. But November 16th dawned a new era, so I'm more interested in 2022 and the continuing relationship, because on November 16th, many of the people that are in the room here know that that's when the board decided to award NEQOLs the whole town under the town's CON. So a lot of the stats that were shown here for tonight for 2021 will be significantly different when Ahmed is back here in January of 2022.
How about June? Let's do it early.
Okay, because you know what, that would be good,
Let's do it
because,
early.
you know, obviously I have a lot of questions I could ask, but I'm gonna save them. Because it's just not fair at this point to kind of compare 2022, where there is no more lease services to the West Webster Fire District, and how that all fits in. And John said we had met with the board of NEQOLs. One thing that was said in that, and I can't stress enough, and I'm gonna end on this, the essential versus non-essential. Unbelievable that you're not essential. The funding and how to have a long-term viable sustainability model for EMS. I said at the board of NEQOLs, I'll say it again, let's get through all this. I know Charlie, our town attorney, and Patty, and John are working with Ahmed and to amend the contract in place between the town and NEQOLs to reflect this new era. I want to get past that so that we can actually work together on whether it's state assemblies or state senates or federal to do something about that essential, non-essential, and that long-term funding. And that's all I have to say. So,
So you did see a significant decrease in your revenue, in that you're not staffing West Webster
Not
Fire
entirely.
Department anymore. And I believe that amount was $300,000 to $350,000 per year revenue, right? So when West Webster got out of the fire or the ambulance business, they're saving $300,000 to $350,000 per year, correct?
I think so, plus no longer equipment, maintenance, ambulance costs, I mean, probably a little, yeah, better more.
Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Flaherty, thank you, everybody.
Thank you very
Hope,
much.
thank you.
I hope we're meeting your expectations.
And that completes tonight's town board workshop. Have a good night, everybody.
Ahmed, do we have another packet?
I do. One
Appreciate it. You're doing a good job.
and one of these is staple. Take that one.
Thank you.
Yep. I do all right?
Yeah, you're good.
Thanks, Mr. Good.